what we're dealing with, forced organ donations, what we're dealing with is an estimation based on statistics, and the government of China does not produce statistics, reliable statistics. The way we did it in our book, which methodologically is sound, is we take the volume of organs that are being used, the volume of organ transplants. We subtract from that the number of organs that come from prisoners sentenced to death and then executed. And then we've got a figure which is explained in no other way except for the sourcing from Falun Gong practitioners, because there's no effective donation system. There's one just set up, and there's no sourcing from the accident victim, the brain dead, cardiac alive. So basically, it's just prisoners sentenced to death and Falun Gong practitioners. Now, Ethan Gutman's actually done some work to see that, which has indicated the abuse is spreading to other populations, which is more recent for Uyghurs and Tibetans. But but historically, once it's spread beyond prisoners sentenced to death, that's where it was going, Falun Gong practitioners. So as long as you've got reliable death penalty statistics and you've got reliable organ transplant statistics, you've got a figure. The trouble is China doesn't produce either statistics, at least in a reliable sort of way. For organ transplants, their figures are better than for death penalty. For death penalty, they do absolutely nothing. For organ transplants, they do actually produce statistics. But the question is how reliable they are. More recently, they've become reliable because the World Health Organization has been dealing with the Chinese health system to try the individual hospitals to report their transplants directly to an organ transplant registry in Hong Kong, which then does the tabulation. So you don't get it to Beijing and somebody fiddling with the figures. It looks as if what they're doing is about 10,000 transplants a year. That's just a rough estimate. In terms of executions, as I say, China produces no statistics, and one of the recommendations, one country after another produced at the Universal Periodic Review, is give us your death penalty statistics, and China refused. So what we're left with is estimates, and we've got NGOs like Amnesty International who go through newspaper reports of prisoners sentenced to death and then executed. We've got Hands Off Cane that talks to lawyers that have been dealing with death penalty clients and extrapolating their caseload. The best estimate that we could figure out from that was about 2,500 a year organs were coming from executed prisoners. So what we're dealing with is sourcing of about 7,500 a year from from Falun Gong practitioners. Now, the death penalty in recent years has gone down, whereas the volume of transports has remained the same. We're down to about 1,000 executions a year, so that instead of 7,500, where the balance has become 1,000, 9,000. I mean, that's a rough estimate, but it's not. It's very difficult to stand 100% behind those figures, because we're dealing with a statistical problem. And this issue of figures has very much engaged the United Nations. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture and on Religious Intolerance, the Committee Against Torture, as well as the University Periodical Review, have asked China to produce these figures. Explain the discrepancy between volume of transplants and volume of sources, because China says, at least now, it's all coming from death penalty cases, but there just isn't that volume of death penalty cases which matches. So the UN system says, explain the discrepancy. China comes back, and a lot of our material comes from official Chinese sources. So one of the people we quote is Xi Bingyi, an official in the Chinese health ministry, who's written an article about volume of transplants. And so the government of China says, we do not produce statistics by treatment, only by disease. At the same time as this article by Xi Bingyi remains on the website, they even do a video interviewing Xi Bingyi where he says, I didn't say that, meanwhile leaving his article on a Chinese website. So we're not getting a proper response. But anyhow, that's the figures. The second, now that I remember the first question, I forgot the second.
Is that how are they killed?
Yeah. Well, we've got some anecdotal evidence there, which is they're killed through the extraction of their organs. I mean, once when China first got into the organ transplant business, which was from prisoners sentenced to death, they were actually executing them and then transplanting afterwards. And the law said you had to kill someone within 3 days of sentence, and you had to kill them by shooting. And they've just recently changed that law to say there can be killing by injection. But the 3-day rule still exists. What foreign doctors were reporting when they went into China, there was deterioration of organs between extraction and transplant. And of course that's the result when you source organs from the dead, the organs deteriorate almost immediately. And in order to do an effective transplant, the patients should still be alive, which is why a law about the brain dead cardiac alive is important. But the information we've heard is that people are injected with potassium, something that keeps them alive. Now, this is of course not unique to Falun Gong. This is also for prisoners sentenced to death. Even though the law says execution by shooting, even before that law changed, some of the prisoners sentenced to death were executed through potassium and then organ extraction. And we have people coming out of China who tell us about that. They see people being injected. We had somebody who is a policeman. These people are being injected and organ extracted in mobile vans. And so we had a policeman who was a defector who worked in one of these vans and talked about potassium injection. And there's someone in our book who I interview using a pseudonym, Larry, who saw these injections. So yes, that seems to be what's happening.
Can I throw 1 minute, Caboose?
Sure,
Just 1 minute.
sure.
I did a completely different method to try to come up with numbers, the survey method. I interviewed 50 Falun Gong refugees. What I came out with, based on the ones that were examined, was a very crude estimate. At the low end of 10,000 harvested, at the high end of 135,000 estimate. That gives you a sense of how difficult this stuff is. But the median of that happens to be about 10,000 difference to Kilgore and Modis's estimate as it goes. So approximately 10,000 a year. That's what I'm getting.